That's it. What's up, y'all? What's up? We'll get started here in a second. Listen to our friend Rooks G here. That's our friend Rooks G. There we go. Yeah, more C.S. Lewis after this, too. After tonight. Also mixing in some movie analysis tonight. Let's go. Yeah, that's our man Rooks G. Oh, what's up, y'all? Tonight we're covering C.S. Lewis, the Screwtape Letters, and we're mixing in some movie analysis here. I'm going to talk about The Little Things with Denzel Washington, Rami Malek, and Jared Leto. And also I'm going to be talking about the Bundy movie, a little bit about Ted Bundy, and then I'm going to be going over a little bit of using, of course, Dave McGowan's Program to Kill. But our main focus is Screwtape Letters. So let's dive into it. Let's get after it. What's up? Hope everybody's well. A little midweek here, going into the summertime. This one's a little different for me, I got to say, because, you know, we focus on literary and, of course, movie analysis, sort of ancillary movie analysis. Movies often function as a kind of illustrative example of some of the themes that we get in literature, unless we're doing them solely for the aesthetics of the movie. We talk about movies a lot. But I thought I would do Screwtape Letters. A lot of people have requested this. And the weird thing about this one is that looking at Screwtape Letters is a little different for me, I'll say, because although C.S. Lewis is a writer and he's also a fiction writer, this book delves into apologetics and philosophy in a way that is in a way this is sort of outside my scope. But I'm going to look at it from a literary perspective and talk about some of the things in this book, because I think that what I really got from this, it's strange how literature always ties into, well, it's the landscape of literature. How literature provides this sort of synchro aspect. You know, I'm not being like purely Jungian. I kind of mean that as a joke, but it's also true. It's intertextuality with life, and a lot of the things that pop up for me in reading, often they often relate to each other in a big web, and so it may be strange for some to relate this book to what seems like a random movie, which is, again, 2021's The Little Things with Denzel. But I saw that when I was reading the book, I saw that as a perfect illustration in one aspect of the kind of epistolary position in the book, the way that the narrative, if you want to call it, drives forward. And, of course, that's because the Screwtape Letters, which was written in 1942, this is during the war. Mid-war, of course, for the English. C.S. Lewis, of course, was born in Belfast. That's why I like him. I really like C.S. Lewis. And I don't really want to go too much into his life. I also watched the movie Shadowlands today, which is the Attenborough movie with Anthony Hopkins. Hello, sir! Hello, sir! But it's got Shadowlands is, if you haven't seen Shadowlands, it's a 1992 movie with Anthony Hopkins and Deborah Winger about C.S. Lewis as a man at Oxford and meeting his later wife. And so I'm not really going to delve into that too much, because I don't really want to focus on his life. I want to focus on his work here, especially in this book. But that movie is essentially about, it begins with Lewis as an older man lecturing at Oxford, and eventually getting a letter from the lady who's going to become his wife, and their relationship. And I've always liked C.S. Lewis just because, I mean, I'm sure probably everybody watching this has read Narnia. And by the way, I'm going to get back into Narnia. I'm going to do all the Narnia books. And I don't know when I'm going to get to it. I'm going to try to get to it pretty soon, but I need to get back into it. I was obsessed with Narnia when I was a kid. I had first I would, when I was in what we called lower school, I checked out the books from the library at school. And first of all, as a kid, I was obsessed with the book. Now, we should be good. There should be no buffering right now. Maybe that's you, but it's random. I don't want to spoil anything, because that's, a lot of times it's here, but we should be good. Maybe a little bit, but we should be good as we go on. And if it's not, then it'll correct itself. But I was obsessed with the Narnia books for one thing because of the covers of the books. And I was just a little kid, but I was obsessed especially with the Silver Chair and with Prince Caspian and the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Just the way that I used to, as a kid, I read the books, and then I was obsessed with this set of books and the cover art. And it's weird how that permeates your mind, especially when you get older. Then I ended up reading Lloyd Alexander, and I've covered the first Lloyd Alexander book in the High King series, and I'm going to get back to the second book, The Black Cauldron, very soon also. But I was really, really taken with the books, and then later, of course, when I was in grad school in Belfast, I was there for undergrad at Queen's University, which C.S. Lewis did not attend. He went off to, of course, Oxford, and then he later taught at Oxford and Cambridge. And C.S. Lewis also went off to England as a young man, went off to public school there, prep school. But he was inspired by the Mourne Mountains, and you can see why when you go there. Crispy, shouts out to Crispy right there. Yeah, I was obsessed. I was obsessed with C.S. Lewis to such an extent that the first time that I went to the Mourne Mountains with my friends there, the direct connection was out of my mind. We didn't go there for that. We were a bunch of friends, drove up there, and we stayed for the night one time when I was an undergraduate, and we built a campfire and we all sat around. Shouts out to my friend David out there, David and Richard and Rick and Johnny, and we drove up there, listening to in Johnny's Volkswagen, going so fast, with Johnny driving, listening to the Queen's greatest hits. We listened to the song "Bicycle" like 40 times in a row, and we were going so fast, and it was fun. It was just us going up there. But when I got to the Mourns and it was dusk, I thought of Narnia, and and then the connection sort of came into the front of my mind there. But yeah, Crispy says, where the mountains of Mourne sweep down to the sea. Well, listen, but that's not all C.S. Lewis, and he's extremely influential. And what I got to say about the Screwtape Letters is it's so brilliant because it really does give us some of the most concise and clear examples in writing of Christian apologetics. And it makes so much sense. And it's also a total a summary in so many ways of human nature. And a lot of this we get from Spencer and from the Fairy Queen and from Slaw Peg, right? Our understanding of the deadly sins, and in a much more poetical way. That's kind of when I think of the Fairy Queen, which I probably need to cover. When I think of the Fairy Queen Fairy Queen's different from Pilgrim's Progress. When I think of Pilgrim's Progress, I think of something like the first word that comes to mind is like earthy. I think of something like earthy. I don't know why, but maybe because it's the name Bunyan. I guess that's probably why, because I'm an American and I think of Paul Bunyan. But when I think of Spencer, I think of kind of how like the poet William Carlos Williams thought about writing the shift that occurred from free verse from his strict metrical verse into free verse. And I think of the way that he describes the sonnet and his writing of Victorian literature. I think of it that way because I saw a visualization of this when I think Hugh Kenner was reading William Carlos Williams' early sonnets, and there was a early 20th century film of a ballet dancer. That's what I think of when I think of the Fairy Queen. But sloth, lust, avarice, wrath, pride, envy, gluttony. But this is different. This is much more concise and much easier to read, and it's deceptive in its complexity. And the reason for that deception is that the book, of course, is a series of infernal epistles. So this is Screwtape, a demon, writing to his younger sort of protege, his nephew, Wormwood. Wormwood, for anybody reading this, Wormwood obviously we think of Revelation, right, and the Star of Wormwood. We think of there's great names in here. Slug Bob, is it Slug Bob? And of course, Screwtape makes me think of Screwface. Remember the Steven Seagal stream we did with Screwface, marked for death. Remember that? Screwface, big up Kingston, Screwface, Gemini twin, big up Bo. So I kept thinking of Screwface, but it's deceptive in its complexity because we have a series of hellish, infernal epistles. This whole mode is about deception, and I think the thing that really gets me about this book is that it's a dangerous book. It's dangerous. It's dangerous in a way, I guess. Here's my take. Okay, here's my hot take for this book. Hot, infernal. This reminds me of the satire of Jonathan Swift in a way, which is in a good and a bad way. So, and Swift being an Irish writer, of course, C.S. Lewis was an Ulsterman, an Ulster Protestant Anglican. But what it makes me think of is that when you read Jonathan Swift, right, and you read the damn satire about how to cure the hunger crisis, right? You guys know what I'm talking about. I hate that piece of writing. I hate that one. I hate it so much because when Swift satirizes the cannibal aspect in that, and it's clearly satire, but it gets to the point in me where it makes me sick to read it because that's obviously part of the point. But there's nothing redeemable in that work. I don't see anything. I don't see anything that shines. There's nothing redeemable. It's not grounded in a kind of it. I mean, I've read it 100 times, but it's not grounded in a kind of anything heavenly, if that makes sense. And that bothers me about reading it because if you're, and I don't know about Swift's personal life. I'm just saying in his writing. I just know that Modest Proposal, Crispy. Yeah, thank you. When you're reading a Modest Proposal, I feel like sick to my stomach because I start to think, okay, but this is satire, but it almost functions as a guidebook. I can clearly read it and go, yeah, but the elites reading this piece, there's no reason for them not to see this as a guide, like, oh, this is a good idea. And anyone with discernment or a discerning mind reads it and goes, no, it's clearly satire, but it functions as a kind of a metaphor for the feeding of the way that the landlord class feeds on the tenants and poverty. But it gets to be too much for me, and I start to think, I'm probably going down a schizo rabbit hole here, but what if this is sincere? Whereas when I read the Screwtape letters, because it's from the point of view, it's written in hell, right? And it's a guidebook, and it deals with the guidebook for the nephew about the bureaucracy of hell and how to turn what he calls the patient, right, which is the human being. Because it's hellish and not in a Gnostic way, it makes me focus on the other side, which he calls the enemy. So I start to think this is so. Okay, so let me try and suss this out in live time here. Here's what I think. So we define things by what they are, not by what they are not, especially in terms of literature. So just as a literary example, a simile is a type of metaphor. A metaphor is a comparison between two unlike things, right? It's not a comparison between two unlike things without using like or as. It's not that. It's the positive active thing. The simile is the type of metaphor that uses like or as. That's the way I think of it. I think of the two positives. So you identify the thing by what it is, not by what it's not. I think there's some sort of metaphor in that, like a metaphor for how to identify the active things in life and the fact that living there's a life force, and that the whole point of the Screwtape letters is that Screwtape is trying to teach Wormwood everything that is not. We will know by what is not. So ironically, it makes me focus on, it obviously makes me, I go into it knowing this is a Christian apologetic book, and I know that I want to focus, I see all the good things in the book. We read it, we see all the good things in the book, and we see how ridiculous the satanic mode is. There's a great part in it, probably the best part in the book is where he says a thing like, he says basically that we, to paraphrase, like, we can't create. We know, we talk about this all the time, that Satan and the devils can't create. They only mimic and mock and create a sort of a weird, mannequin version of a human. And he says something like their success rate is 0%. And that's like the best part of the book for me. I thought that was interesting, especially when he gets into later in the book. He talks about axiomatic thinking, and he's talking about how, you have so another has not unless it absorbs. So the weirdest thing in the book, I think, is the fact that there are so many points you forget. You have to continuously tell yourself that you're reading the demon's book and that the enemy he refers to is God. I mean, it's because we know that. But the way that he makes sense in the book, you have to remember that everything he's saying is the opposite, right? So for instance, at the end of the book, one of the wild things in it is that we get this part where he's basically berating his nephew, Wormwood, because Wormwood wants to take like direct action. He wants the quick and easy way. And this is crazy. This really like blew me away, that if the whole point of the demonic, what do you call this? Modus operandi is to destroy God's creation, to corrupt it, which is essentially in our world is like a Depop thing, right? Is Depop. Yeah, Jesse just says it right there. With the Depop going on, we should be okay. So if that's the whole mode of the infernal system, then it would make sense that you would take the quick and easy way and that everyone gets destroyed. But actually, that's not what Wormwood says. Wormwood says, no, sometimes demons, their mode is they want to preserve life in order to further corruption, because this is the whole thing with the war that's going on in the background. So World War II is going on in the background, and he's talking about the Blitz and bombs, and he says basically anybody, he makes a point that anybody can, this is Robert Pinsky, anybody can die, evidently. Few go happily, irradiating joy, knowledge, love. Many need oblivion, painkillers, quickest respite, sweet time unafflicted, various worlds, X equals your zenith. That Robert Pinsky poem, the alphabet poem. Well, so if that's the case, then he says all of them are going to go. All the humans are going to go. But their mission is absolute corruption, kind of like in the movie Prisoners. Remember, Jerry and I talked about Prisoners about 2 years ago, and that's their whole mode is the labyrinthine symbol within the movie. So we've covered so much of this work like this kind of infernal literature. We've done Paradise Lost. We've done Dante's Inferno, right? I covered Nefarious with David Patrick Harry. We've covered Angel Heart. I mean, there's so much of this. And what's another point about this book is that it's refreshing and amazing to read a book that is not Gnostic. It's not purely Gnosticism. We see Harold Bloom says Gnosticism is the American religion, right? A kind of Gnosticism mixed with Pentecostalism, which I covered in Blood Meridian. And it's amazing to read a book that is not that is so fervently a Christian book. It's insane that this exists to me, in the best way. So some of the things that I wanted to really bring out were like, okay, book 3 was the book is also so funny, but he also talks about the big joke, and that's also relevant for right now. So before I get to chapter 3 here, when he talks about the big joke, it reminds me of The Killing Joke, right? With Alan Moore. I mean, what he says essentially, what I took from it was that obviously humor humor and jokes are good for us. Humor lightens our body, it lightens our spirit, it releases, oxytocin or whatever it releases, I don't know, but it lightens our mood, it destroys the kind of anxiety that is inherent, especially in the postmodern world. But there can come a point where the person making the joke can do something extremely insidious. And this is especially relevant now because the best comedians that live now, we all, I've mentioned my favorite comics like so many times, and it can be seductive to describe the world in a completely black-pilled sense. And that's fine in most ways because we live in an absurd world where there's just so much bad. And there's so much bad that you see as a mirror that there's a good in contrast to that. But there can be this one thing where the comic is like absolutely liberated to make jokes about anything and to introduce doubt and destruction into the mind of the listener, and he is free to do that because of the label of comedian. Does that make sense? Now, this isn't. He actually also mentions, that if you make a joke and that you don't like the joke, then there's also this criticism inherent where, the person is referred to as puritanical or whatever because he doesn't like the joke. And that's especially useful to the demons in the book, right? Because it divides people in a sense and introduces this insane doubt. And it's not the joke that's bad. It's not even the comedian that's bad. It's the one little kernel of doubt that it introduces. And that's a through line in the book. That's one of the themes of the book. He says basically that, one of the ways to corrupt a person is essentially that if the patient, the human, is focused on prayer and they are fervently and with holy thoughts, you can't corrupt that. They can't really. He says in this one part that they I'm not looking at the book right now, but I will in a second. But that they have a kind of cloud around them, a kind of aura, a heavenly cloud around them that offers them protection. It's like a shield, right? So you can't do anything because he says the enemy will protect them in that sense, meaning God. But what you can do is whisper in their ear to stray their thoughts into, for example, hunger, right? So you introduce, oh, I'm hungry, and then the person goes and gets something to eat and stops what they're doing, and then that by the time they get back, they've already forgotten what they were doing, which is an appeal to the kind of animalism in human beings, right? When you read about animal behavior and thoughts and how for instance, the crow is the Ted Hughes crow. The crow is above the crow and the dolphin are of a superior intelligence because they can remember steps, 2 or 3 steps. So to get food from, a small place, the crow will make a tool and the tool will make another tool. And then that tool will get the food from the small place, which is something that animals don't have. But he appeals to that sort of the corrupt nature of our bodies to do that in the book, which I think is so insightful in this. Yeah, and let's see, Papa Prez says C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien were buddies and both belonged to the Northern Star, right? I don't know. I know they were buddies. I don't know about that. I'm not really, honestly, I genuinely don't know. And I'm trying to stay away from reading about Lewis's life so much because I want to focus on the work. Not that it's bad to focus on it, but I know that they influence each other. And I know that, I kind of have this idea of, or had this idea of Lewis and Tolkien both, obviously being affected by World War I, which they were. But I think that, that's part of it's crazy that there's this thing in modernity, in the early modern era in literature, where the fragmentation of World War I, physically, even in the landscape, right? You have this culmination of this arc that it started with the Enlightenment, or started before, but really went from the Enlightenment all the way into World War I, across the 19th century ended in this culmination with the Great War, where all of these people are sent to the front lines, and it's the last romantic war. With the classical romantic war was probably the war of northern aggression, right? Where you have dudes on horseback with sabers. So it reminds the youth of a kind of Arthurian war. And then the Crimean War is the death knell of that, right? The charge of the Light Brigade is the death knell of that. And then this is what All Quiet on the Western Front deals with this. I did an analysis of that, is all the youth hear the bell to go and sign up for the noble war, thinking that it's going to be like the novels that they read. So they all think they're going to be on horseback with sabers, and it ends up with this thing where they just end up in a trench with trench mouth and rats and the skeletons of their friends, and all for little pieces of territory, a foot ahead every day. The war brings forth absolute terror and destruction. With chemical warfare, the tank, the aerial bombardment, all of these things that are still that's the beginning of what's still in an arc to now. So, I think that the war affected people differently, obviously, and in a literary sense, T.S. Eliot writes *The Wasteland*. Ezra Pound is affected, by in a literary sense, an artistic sense, by the war, and they're able to put this into words, and then of course, we've covered Fitzgerald and Hemingway, and all of these people. We've covered Wilfred Owen, right? Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori, but there's a completely different way that C.S. Lewis and Tolkien go, which is into, I suppose, where you should go. I mean, instead of focusing on the pain and the destruction of the war, Jack Lewis, they called him Jack Lewis, focuses on how pain is a necessary part of living because it brings us closer to God, because we have free will, and because we are striving for the next life and for salvation, instead of becoming our own gods and worshiping ourselves, thinking we're going to live forever here. Shouts out to Kyle right there. $50 says, Red Bulls and a pack of heaters on me. Love your work. Hey, thanks, Kyle. Really appreciate you. Let me give you a like right there. Thank you so much, Kyle. That is awesome. Hey, if you guys want to support, you can do it through Super Chats. You can also you can support me directly right there with the links provided. We've got all my links up. Let me see. Yeah, you can support me through PayPal and all these links if you want to. Now, I'm going to get to the little things in Ted Bundy and how this plays into this, which is, it might seem strange, but we're going to get into it. Let me look at chapter 3 real quick here, because this one is funny, and it's funny and so true. It's great that Lewis has this sense of humor writing this. This is the chapter on domestic strife, and what I said in my little note here was the commonplace evil of annoyance. So I love how he does this. He says, my dear Wormwood, obviously, I'm very pleased by what you tell me about this man's relations with his mother, but you must press your advantage. I love how he's continuously giving direct advice, right? The enemy, this is Screwfest, this is a screw tape, referring to the capital E enemy as, God is the enemy, right? A volume up. I mean, the volume should be fine. Hopefully, is volume good for you guys? I find that I often think this when I'm listening, but I have to plug my. I mean, I'm not trying to be. I don't even get sarcasm, but I'm saying here when I never listen to anything on my phone again anymore. I have to plug it into a Bluetooth, because the phones, the speakers in phones degrade so quickly. And so I have to plug it into a Bluetooth now when I listen to anything. And I often think, I used to think that it was the person, but what happens here, I don't really need to explain, but if I turn it up here, if I turn up the volume, then it gets too hot. And it's probably already hot right now, but there's no way for me to get around it. Let me turn it up just a little bit here. Hopefully that's not too hot. Okay, you may not even notice the difference. And I'm like yelling in my house. So so I hope this is good. I hope it's good enough. Let me turn it up just a little bit more. That should be good. Is that a little better? I just don't want it to be hot like I'm yelling. Let me do a little bit more. There we go. Okay, that should be good. Okay. Okay, I want to make a pleasant audio experience for you guys. I'm working on audio to make it better here. I mean, because I'm going to take my headphones out. So that'll be one of the next big steps. And my friend Mikhail, Technor Graphics, is helping me with that. I might have to move this whole operation to a different part of the house so that I can work on that with things. But anyway, that's not interesting. So he says, I'm very pleased by what you tell me about this man's relations with his mother, but you must press your advantage. The enemy will be working with the center from the center outwards, gradually bringing more and more of a patient's conduct under the new standard, and may reach his behavior to the old lady at any moment. You want to get in first. I love that. You want to get in first. Keep in close touch with our colleague Glubos, who's in charge of the mother, and build up between you in that house a good, settled habit of mutual annoyance, daily pinpricks. The following methods are useful. I love how he gives a play-by-play breakdown of just how the demon affects the patient, because everyone's assigned this demon, right? Everyone's assigned the better angels of their nature, as he says in Saving Private Ryan. Remember that? He's quoting that letter, which is tomorrow, by the way. The big D-Day's tomorrow, 80th anniversary. But and also the demon, right? So he says, so I love that he gives this kind of breakdown right here, and that he intersperses this with simple imperative sentences of do that. Number one, keep his mind on the inner life. He thinks his conversion is something inside him, and his attention is therefore chiefly turned and present to the states of his own mind, or rather to that very expurgated version of them, which is all you should allow him to see. Encourage this, see? Keep his mind off the most elementary duties by directing it to the most advanced and spiritual ones. This is interesting. Aggravate that most useful human characteristic, the horror and neglect of the obvious. You must bring him to a condition in which he can practice self-examination for an hour without discovering any of those facts about himself, which are perfectly clear to anyone who's ever lived in the same house with him or worked in the same office. This is so interesting. So my thought about this is essentially that if you know someone who is a convert, or you know someone who is zealous in their and fervent in their faith, or even really in anything, but they have taken and they've gone down the rabbit hole into something, but specifically here he's talking about faith, then the way that the demon is going to affect him is that he's going to make the rest of his life disgusting by neglect. And so the other people around him will start to hate him and hate what he stands for, because they can't stand. It's like if you are a person who if you were like one of the cynics, right? If you were a person who, thought that in some sort of Neoplatonic Gnostic fashion that, everything in the world is corrupt, and that this is just a shadow of another world, and so I don't have to do anything, right? Because it doesn't mean anything. Then the stink of the person, the hoarding in their house will turn people off, and they'll say, especially if they don't know, right, or have discernment, I suppose, they'll say, yeah, but that person believes in this, so look at what they do. That's who you want to be like. It's disgusting. He says that's where the demon, that's where they sort of take action with this. But isn't that true in a way? I guess it's. It's interesting because one of the crazy things about the book is that in most books, the spiritual metaphysical realm of literature is the allegory. So it's focused on our world here, and the allegory is to be read into. It's in the subtext. But here, it's the opposite, and that's because it's inverted in terms of what we're reading. But it also ends up being true, in a sense, that that what we really are focused on is not the reading into things. It's actually that is the goal, right? So if that's the case, then the corruption of the world is what ends up turning people off in a much more important sense. So it's like looking at the iceberg upside down and then blasting it with hellfire, I suppose. He says, 2, it is no doubt impossible to prevent his praying for his mother, for we have means of rendering the prayers innocuous. Make sure they're always very, quote, spiritual, that he's always concerned with the state of her soul and never with her rheumatism. 2 advantages will follow. In the first place, his attention will be kept on what he regards as her sins, by which, with a little guidance from you, he can be induced to mean any of her actions which are inconvenient or irritating to himself. Thus, you can keep rubbing the wounds of the day a little sorer even while he's on his knees. What a great image here. So, I don't mean great. It's great that he uses that. It's powerful because it's so true, right? He says, the operation is not at all difficult, and you'll find it very entertaining. In the second place, since his ideas about her soul will be very crude and often erroneous, he will, in some degree, be praying for an imaginary person, and it will be your task to make that imaginary person daily less and less like the real mother, the sharp-tongued old lady at the breakfast table. In time, you may get the cleavage so wide that no thought or feeling from his prayers for the imagined mother will flow over into treatment of the real one. I've had patients of my own so well in hand that they can be turned at a moment's notice from impassioned prayer for a wife or son's soul to beating or insulting the real wife or son without qualm. And this is best exemplified, the opposite of this is best exemplified how Christ is God and also man. So he's here in real life and healing sick people. A guy, there's a disgusting leper who comes around, somebody's blind. There's people with disease, there's sex workers, there's all these gross things, but those are also real and God treats them, right? They're examples of a spiritual sickness made flesh, right? But God heals those things. So he says for the demons, you have to make them forget about one and just focus on the other because that's the sort of poison inherent here. When 2 humans have lived together, this is 3, for many years, it usually happens that each has tones of voice and expressions of face which are almost unendurably irritating to the other. Work on that. That's my favorite sentence in the whole thing. It's so true. That is so true. Work on that. This is the reason why. This is one of the reasons why, for example, when I first went to college, my roommate lived with me for a few weeks. When I first moved to Belfast, my roommate lived with me for a few weeks. I must be incredibly hard to live with. I'm loud. I'm full. You walk in the door to say hello, and I say, "Come on in, caller." Right, full on blitz. So it's, I guess maybe it's hard for people to, I just need to chill, right? Whereas my chill time is almost like, my time alone is like 99% of my life, right? I have to be alone so much of the time. And so people who live with you just end up being terrorized by you, right? But in a relationship sense, it's the little things. It's the movie I want to cover. It's the little things. It's the cough or the way you sneeze all the time, or the way that you click your teeth on the fork every time you eat, or the way that you swallow food, or those things drive people insane, and they start to make no, I don't. They actually don't. Crispy. No, when I go to sleep, I sleep like Dracul. I've crossed oceans of time to find you. I sleep in a full black tie tuxedo, arms crossed, lying on my back, legs totally straight out, and I don't move the entire night. And I'm also a light sleeper. Any noise, and I already sense that there's some. By the way, I have to say this total tangent here, but I thought of this the other day. Before I forget, because I'm gonna talk about Ted Bundy in a few minutes. Here's some. This isn't advice. You don't need advice from me. I'm just some dude. But here's my advice. If you are inside your house, and if you're inside your house and you hear a noise out front, and you start to think, oh, someone's in the front yard or someone's trying to open the front window, don't go to the front door to look. If you're going to look, this goes for the dudes. This wouldn't go for the ladies, I suppose. This goes for the dudes. Don't go to the front door to look. Don't go to the back door. Don't go to the front door. Don't go to the front window and look, because then what happens is you open the front window and you have the horror of all horrors, a person standing there in the window looking at you, right? No, you go to the back door, you lock the back door, hide the key, and then you go around the opposite side of the house around to the front, to the part where where you didn't hear them, so that you're now behind. Does that make sense? I'm serious about that. Because you hear a noise. What happens now in the world, by the way, is you either, if it's in the daytime, this is a common occurrence here. If you hear a noise at the front, or somebody comes to the front door and it seems weird, and you are not trusting your gut and you don't have any instincts, and then you don't realize that either someone is trying to sneak in the back door to rob you, or that they're trying to throw you off by questions they're asking you, and then to bust in the front door. So don't go to the front. Go to the back. Anyway, I just thought of that with Ted Bundy. But why did I get on that tangent? Yeah, that's the way Steven Seagal would do it, for sure. Why did I think of that? Okay. So he says in number 4, in civilized life, domestic hatred usually expresses itself by saying things which would appear quite harmless on paper. The words are not offensive, but in such a voice or at such a moment that they're not far short of a blow in the face. To keep this game up, you and Glubos must see to it that each of these two fools have a sort of double standard. Your patient must demand that all his own utterances are to be taken at their face value and judged simply on the actual words, while at the same time judging all his mother's utterances with the fullest and most oversensitive interpretation of the tone and the context of the suspected intention. She must be encouraged to do the same to him. Hence, from every quarrel they can both go away convinced, or very nearly convinced, that they are quite innocent. You know, that kind of thing. I simply ask her what time dinner will be, and she flies into a temper. Once this habit is well established, you have the delightful situation of a human saying things with the express purpose of offending, and yet having a grievance when offense is taken. They cry out as they strike you. Exactly. This is where grace and patience come in. And I would say that, personally, I'm extremely slow to be annoyed in a serious way, or to anger. And I think that's because anybody who, let's say, I don't have children, but if you have children, if you watch videos of like lions and their cubs crawling all over them, or the dog is sitting on the floor of the living room and the puppy is crawling all over it, then that's a good example. That's kind of a good example of how I think adult human beings should be in a healthy way, as a kind of resting state. If it's not advice, obviously. I'm just saying, or Jethro says, or panda bears. I think that, for instance, if you are a teacher of high school kids, especially older high school kids, 17, 18-year-olds, or college students, this is this does one of two things. It either, probably earlier in your career, it turns you into somebody who's annoyed, and you're in a childlike mentality, in a childlike state where you have to get the last word. And then as you get older, you realize the last word isn't important. It's more important to demonstrate how to act, and to act with integrity, and to try to be an even-keeled person. Which is, something that I think, I work on, and that a lot of people, a lot of us probably try and work on, even without being able to identify it as such. But when you are around, it's probably different working. Like if you work in an office or something, then it's pretty much probably quiet, or you're in your cubicle and you're dealing with people that are, essentially pretty innocuous all the time. So that presents a different set of problems. But when you're around people that are always talking, always loud, there's a weird modulation in sound. People are always asking you questions. If you do a job where you're the center of attention all the time and you have to deal with lots of people, then I think that it does something to your life where you develop a weird kind of patience. You're not offended easily. You got to have a sense of humor, and you just try and do the right thing moment to moment and take each person as they come. This is what, like, you know, people that are often, people that are in power are often described as having this, where when they talk to a person, it makes them seem like they're the only person in the world, and that's obviously for different intentions, But I think it's important. One of the things that's so important in the world we live in now is knowing how to react and knowing how to listen and knowing how to actively listen to a person and to be present in a situation, because everything is a time crunch. So we all probably know a person where every time you talk to them, oh, I gotta go, or oh, yep, I'm waiting on a call, or yeah, yep, and they're ordering McNuggets, and that's fine for most of life. But I guess all we can do is take accountability for ourselves and try and be a person like that acts like how we want other people to act to us, which is that when you have something to tell somebody, they listen. When you have a joke, they haven't tuned out halfway through the joke, so they don't get the joke, and then they ask you to explain it. That's probably one of the most annoying things. And you just have to, repeat the joke, I guess, or not, or make a funny situation out of it. I don't know. But I find this chapter to be pretty relevant, I think. First, he says, finally, tell me something about the old lady's religious position. Is she at all jealous of the new factor in her son's life? At all piqued that he should have learned from others, and so late what she considers she gave him such good opportunity of learning in childhood? Does she feel he is making a great deal of fuss about it, or that he's getting in on very easy terms? Remember the elder brother in the enemy story. Let's see. This one, pages 34 and 35 are about feelings. This one is really important, I think. He says, if this fails, you must fall back on a subtler misdirection of his intention. Whenever they are attending to the enemy himself, we are defeated. Meaning, if they are attending to God himself, the demon is defeated. But there are ways of preventing them from doing so. The simplest is to turn their gaze away from him, capital H, him, towards themselves. Keep them watching their own minds and trying to produce feelings there by the action of their own wills. When they meant to ask him for charity, let them instead start trying to manufacture charitable feelings for themselves and not notice that this is what they're doing. When they meant to pray for courage, let them really be trying to feel brave. When they say they're praying for forgiveness, let them be trying to feel forgiven. Teach them to estimate the value of each prayer by their success in producing the desired feeling, and never let them suspect how much success or failure of that kind depends on whether they are well or ill, fresh or tired at that moment. This is why this is different from Jonathan Swift or from some sort of purely secular, kind of satirical literary humor. Because when you read this, you clearly see yourself in this. And I feel like I do. I'm sure you do too. That this is exactly what human beings do. And we live in a fallen world and we do all this stuff. But it's so true that instead of asking for true forgiveness, we ask for the feeling of being forgiven. How relevant is that? How amazing is that he points that out? But of course, the enemy will not meantime be idle. Whenever there's prayer, there's danger of his own immediate action. He's cynically indifferent to the dignity of his position. It's interesting he uses the terms that are the opposite of true, but true for the demon, right? He's cynically indifferent to the dignity of his position, and ours as pure spirits, and to human animals on their knees, he pours out self-knowledge in a quite shameless fashion. But even if he defeats your first attempt at misdirection, we have a subtler weapon. The humans did not start from that direct perception of him which we, unhappily, cannot avoid. They have never known that ghastly luminosity, that stabbing and searing glare which makes the background of permanent pain to our lives. If you look into your patient's mind when he's praying, you will not find that. If you examine the object to which he's attending, you will find that it is a composite object containing many quite ridiculous ingredients. There will be images derived from the picture of the enemy as he appeared during the discreditable episode known as the Incarnation. There will be vaguer, perhaps quite savage and puerile images associated with the other two persons. Talking about the Trinity here. I always wear my Trinity knot. Then I got, this is my Belfast Trinity knot. There will even be some of his own reverence and of bodily sensations accompanying it, objectified and attributed to the object revered. I've known cases where what the patient called his God was actually located up and to the left at the corner of the bedroom ceiling or inside his own head or in a crucifix on the wall. But whatever the nature of the composite object, you must keep him praying to it, to the thing that he's made, not to the person who's made it, capital P person. You may even encourage him to attach great importance to the correction and improvement of his composite object and to keeping it steadily before his imagination during the whole prayer. For if he ever comes to make the distinction, if he ever consciously directs his prayers not to what I think thou art, but to what thou knowest thyself to be, our situation is for the moment desperate. Once all his thoughts and images have been flung aside, or if he retained with a full recognition of their merely subjective nature, and the man trusts himself to the completely real, external, invisible, capital P presence, there with him in the room and never knowable by him as he's known by it, why then it is that that's the incalculable may occur. In avoiding the situation, this real nakedness of the soul in prayer, you'll be helped by the fact that the humans themselves do not desire it as much as they suppose. There's such a thing as getting more than they bargain for. It's crazy. It's kind of a reference in chapter 7 to a sort of an Al Crowleyan type figure here. He says, this is definitely 1942 high modernism. I wonder you should ask me whether it's essential to keep the patient in ignorance of your own existence. That question, at least for the present phase of the struggle, has been answered for us by the high command. Our policy for the moment is to conceal ourselves. Our course, of course, this has not always been so. We're really faced with a cruel dilemma. When the humans disbelieve in our existence, we lose all the pleasing results of direct terrorism, and we make no magicians. On the other hand, when they believe in us, we cannot make them materialists and skeptics, at least not yet. I have great hopes that we shall learn in due time how to emotionalize and mythologize their science to such an extent that what is, in effect, a belief in us, though not under that name, will creep in while the human mind remains closed to the belief in the enemy and God. The life force, the worship of sex, and some aspects of psychoanalysis may prove useful. If once we can produce our perfect work, the materialist magician, the man, not using but veritably worshiping what he vaguely calls forces while denying the existence of spirits, then the end of our war will be in sight. So that's it. That's scientism. That is science. That's scientism, and that's also I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. So it's amazing that C.S. Lewis touches on the very things that are still relevant. It's kind of eye-opening to me because even in the introduction talks about how most people assume that probably I don't know about most people, but it's a common assumption that Satan is the direct yin and yang opposite of Christ. It's kind of Jesus and Lucifer at the same side of things, man. It's that sort of thing. But it's also a sort of common perception in terms of how people view religion, especially people who are spiritual and not religious, I guess. But actually, St. Michael is the opposite of Satan, right? Satan is not the opposite of Christ. Christ is the second person of the Trinity. That St. Michael is the opposite. But if people can see that, Lewis is kind of making a point in my view, I guess, that what I get from this is that if people think that good and evil are like physics, equal and opposite reactions, then the end of their war is in sight, and the victor is the inferno, right? Whereas evil is the privation of good, or the corruption of good, or the destruction of the good by human beings living in a fallen world, and that all of life is when Adam and Eve sin, that we're we're fallen, and that we're in sin. We're always in it, and it's a constant struggle to strive to break that. But there's so much against us in a sense by being human. But there's a good side of that, which is that when the victory occurs, such as at the end of the book, right? At the end of the book, Wormwood, Screwtape berates Wormwood because he's died in the war. He's been, I guess, destroyed in a blitz attack. He's died. He's dead, but that he was victorious because he died without being fully taken as the patient by the demon. And this is what this is what I was talking about earlier when he needed more life in order to corrupt him. In fact, he says it's if the demons succeed in pushing it so that the man dies in the war, that's not a victory. The victory is if he survives the war. And he doesn't even need to say this in the book, but that is clearly it, because surviving the war. I was watching I came home and I turned on the Boomer News, and I was watching this old man who was in D-Day talking, and he's there in Normandy, and he signed up for the military when he was 16. He lied about his age, and he was a coxswain on one of the pillbox boats, and it says that basically the boat hit something in the water, and it thrust him forward. He broke his sternum. He broke his jaw in 3 places, and he had a crack in his head. And next thing he knew, he looked up and he saw a guy that he was with get split in half. He was like blown in half. And his first thought was, what am I doing here? And why are they caring about me? Why are the medics attending to me? He said he thought he'd had a heart attack, but he was too young to have had a heart attack. He's like 16. So he said when he goes to, he says he's had a great life, and God has made him have a family. He's had a wonderful life. He's now an old man, and he feels great about being alive, but he feels terrible about the buddies that he lost. And he named 2 of his friends, and he called them like SpaghettiOs or something. He says they were both Italian Americans, and he says sometimes, this was crazy that this guy said this. I'd never heard anyone talk like this before. He says that he goes to their graves sometimes, and he looks down at them, and he says he looks down and he can see them lying down below him, and he's talking to them just like he's talking to us. And he says, I've had a great life. If you want to take my place, then that's fine. That's fine, because I've had a great life. And he says that the thing that they called war, they called it battle fatigue after that. They didn't have a word for PTSD. Even this old man was really like keen on terms. He was really with it. But he said they had battle fatigue, and he had one friend up in Illinois. He named his friend. I love how this old man named his friends. He said their names, like, because they're living with him. He said that one of his buddies had battle fatigue, and he was up in Illinois, and he said they took him down to the hospital, and they put him in a straitjacket, and they shocked him, and then he died not too long after that. So that's what that's what they used to do to people. Now that's what he's talking about in the book. If you can survive, it's the horror afterwards that is destructive. It's not the dying gloriously in battle or So I thought that was so relevant. On page 47, he talks about, he kind of mentions fake flags here. He says, let's see, page 46, he says, the church herself is, of course, heavily defended, and we've never quite succeeded in giving her all the characteristics of a faction. But subordinate factions within her have often produced admirable results. From the parties of Paul and of Apollos at Corinth down to the Orthodox and liberal parties in the church. If your patient can be induced to become a conscientious objector, he'll automatically find himself in one of a small, vocal, organized, and unpopular society, and the effects of this on one so new to Christianity will almost certainly be good in terms of the demon. So bad, but only almost certainly. Has he had serious doubts about the lawfulness of serving in a just war before his present war began? Is he a man of great physical courage, so great that he will have no half-conscious misgivings about the real motives of his pacifism? Can he, when nearest to honesty, no human is ever very near, feel fully convinced that he is actuated wholly by the desire to obey the enemy? If he is that sort of man, his pacifism will probably not do us much good, and the enemy will probably protect him from the usual consequences of belonging to a sect. Your best plan in that case would be to attempt a sudden, confused, emotional crisis from which he might emerge as an uneasy convert to patriotism. Such things can often be managed, but if he is the man I take him to be, try pacifism. That's a fake flag. He's talking about a galvanizing event. An F flag. Page 83 talks about, there's a self-reference, kind of a self-deprecating reference on page 83, where he mentions his actual name, C.S. Lewis, which I thought was funny. Let's see. Let me kind of get through to the end here. He's talking about Toad Pipe, one of the other demons. On page... this is good. On pages 114 and 115, secrecy is anathema. Hey, thanks out there for that that donation right there. I'm going to get to that in a second. No, fake flag, a big non-event type of thing, a Gulf of Tonga, a Gulf of Tonga type event. On pages 114 and 115, he says, he must be made to feel, he'd better not put it into words, how different we Christians are. And by, quote, we Christians, he must really but unknowingly mean my set. And by my set, he must not mean the people who in their charity and humility have accepted me, but the people with whom I associate by right. Success here depends on confusing him. If you should try to make him explicitly and professedly proud of being a Christian, you will probably fail. The enemy's warnings are too well known. If, on the other hand, you let the idea of, quote, we Christians drop out altogether and merely make him complacent about, quote, his set, you will produce not true spiritual pride, but mere social vanity, which by comparison is a puny little sin. What you want is to keep a sly self-congratulation mixing with all his thoughts and never allow him to raise the question, what precisely am I congratulating myself about? The idea of belonging to an inner right, of a secret, is very sweet to him. Play on that nerve. Teach him, using the influence of this girl when she's silliest, to adopt an air of amusement at the things the unbelievers say. Some theories, which he may meet in modern Christian circles, may here prove helpful. Theories, I mean, that place the hope of a society in some inner ring of scholars, some trained minority of theocrats. It is no affair of yours whether those theories are true or false. The great thing is to make Christianity a mystery religion in which he feels himself one of the initiates. Right? Yes, KF. So this is the thing. This is the thing that, that JFK talks about, right, in his speech. Just to use a kind of secular example in terms of society, which is that the idea of secrecy is anathema to Americans, but people everywhere want to be part of a secret thing. They want what they have, nobody else to have. And that's one of the things here, that there's one thing in the world that is free and open to everybody if they so choose it, right? Knock on the door, right, and shall be opened. All you got to do is, and the door isn't hidden. The door is, we know that the gateway is small. Not many are going to be able to walk through it, but in terms of trying, the final door, but in terms of finding the door, everybody can see it. It's right there. We have that thing. Everybody in the world has that. But people want secrecy and they want to be part of a secret club. And this is obviously we live in an age where that has reached its total zenith, right? Where the people in the know, in the secret thing, are the ones who rule everything. And yet, there's this door that's open to everybody, but it becomes more and more obscured. A lot of times by, what he's saying here is well-meaning people, well-intentioned people. So anyway, there's a lot in this. There's a lot. I mean, you just read this. If you haven't read the Screwtape Letters, read it. It's insane how beautiful it is and how insightful and how the depth of the book, because the most of the vocabulary in the book, for example, and the diction is not. It's not a terribly complex book. It's a series of infernal epistles where you're really reading a letter in a way to yourself. And what to do and what not to do, obviously. So I think that it's a pretty amazing book. Before I get to the next part of the stream, which is the analysis of The Little Things, the Denzel movie, let me read a couple of super chats here. Shouts out to my friend Taylor who just called. Shouts out to Jason for that $15 PayPal. Really appreciate you, Jason. As always, you are so awesome. Thank you so much, my friend. Yes, you are the best. Shouts out to Evan for that $20 super chat on PayPal. He says, so good to see you again. Thank you, Evan. Really appreciate that. That means a lot to me. I really, really appreciate the support. And also, something came in last night, and this is from Robert, and he said he sent $10 on Venmo, and he said, I heard someone say recently that the greatest work of art ever created is the Divine Liturgy. I'm not sure I agree because to my slow boy mind, the liturgy transcends art, but I'm just a bartender. What do you think? Hey, that's a great question, and it's probably too complex and requires a nuanced answer for me to answer in writing back, so I'll answer it right here, and shouts out to you for sending me that super chat. Really appreciate that. I would say that for the most part, I agree with you because, but there's some nuance here. I think that the question is, I'm going to take a second to answer this because I think it deserves it. So, for example, so on the one hand, the Bible, Scripture, and especially for English literature, the King James Bible is the font of all literature. It's the King James Bible is modern English. We get modern English from the King James Bible and from Shakespeare. And it's also the source of all literature in terms of stories, plot lines, analogies, allegories, metaphors, symbols. There's no way to measure the scope of that for so many reasons. And also, the Psalms are poems. The Psalms are the most beautiful poems ever written. But the Psalms are not poetry in the sense of art. They are art, but they transcend that. They're bigger than that. And the difference is that when you experience beautiful art, for instance, I think that the Mozart's Requiem, the Sistine Chapel ceiling, the entire body of work of Shakespeare, John Donne's Holy Sonnet 14, Batter My Heart, are all the most beautiful things created by men. They're what human beings created, but they point us up to the heavens. They glorify God through working through us, working through them, and showing us the two purposes of art, right? Our relationship with God. Why are we here? They answer the questions. Why are we here? What are we doing here? And how are we supposed to do things while we're here? What's our relationship with each other? But they are not the focus of devotion. We don't worship them. We use them to see the beauty that God has created through us and the beauty of God's creation, but we don't worship them. Whereas the Psalms and Scripture are for pure devotion. They're for the worship of God. They're part of the ritual of how to worship God that He has given us, right? The Scripture is God's word. So there's a difference. They are beyond art, but they are also the best examples of art, and art comes from them. But they are more than that, and that comes through our strict religious devotion. Does that make sense? And so, if you want a super chat, you can do that. We got the links right here, and you can support me through PayPal and through the others. So let me talk about this movie, The Little Things, because The Little Things which came out in 2021. I remember watching this and talking to Jethro about it. Jethro saw it before I did, and I was left with wanting more in this movie, and I'm glad that I went back and rewatched it because this scene right here, though, when I was reading Screwtape Letters, really made me think in a way of a kind of inverted Screwtape and Wormwood. In a way, a kind of Virgil and Dante. Yes, yes, and that's because what the movie is about is we have Denzel Washington, of course, again, and the movie has heavy Christian symbolism and elements within it, and redemption and an idea of what redemption means, or at least they're trying to make it mean, and how it goes right and how it goes wrong in the movie. So what happens is that we see Denzel Washington at the beginning of the movie starting off in the desert. He's in the wilderness, and he's in this he's in his trailer home. He lives by himself. He walks outside. He gets in his car, and he drives to work. He gets to work. He's told by his boss that he's got to take some evidence down to L.A. because he's got nobody else. Well, we can sense that there's something wrong with this situation, and that there's something that's bothering Denzel. But he is tasked with something, and he has to go on his quest away from his home, and that's going to take him back to the wilderness, by the way. But he's got to go down to L.A. into the center of. It's interesting because he's in the wilderness by himself, in sort of exile. But then he's got to go into the center of a kind of pandemonium. And when he gets there, he walks in, and there's a press conference going on with Rami Malek, and they are looking for. Basically, Rami Malek is a homicide detective who is looking for a serial killer of women in the movie. And Denzel Washington literally goes and talks to a boss who has strange eyes when he's talking to him. Oh, it's you again. He meets all of his old people. So we know that now that he was a cop in L.A., he was a homicide detective, and now he is exiled out, and he's basically, kind of a podunk sheriff. But he looks at Rami Malek, and he literally sees him through glass, and he walks through the looking glass back into his life and talks to him. Or he looks at him giving his press conference. And then we find out Rami Malek does something interesting in this movie. Usually you have this weird dichotomy between cops like this where they don't trust each other, and we don't know whether maybe the cop is the serial killer. Well, in this one, Rami Malek says, look, I got something interesting. I've heard about you. Would you mind going with me? Go with me for a ride. I could use your expertise because he's heard about him. And what we learn throughout the movie is that basically Rami Malek is a kind of Dante to Denzel's Virgil, and he's a protege, and he's being guided through how to do his job, even though he's already a competent detective. But Rami Malek is essentially the younger version of Denzel here in terms of their actions. So they go to this apartment, and they find that a woman has been murdered. She's got a bag over her head. She's bound, and there are blood stains all over. They walk in darkness. They look at there's luminol, and they look at with the blue light, and then the lights all of a sudden come on, so it's illuminated fully. And Denzel has no reaction to this. He is totally, he totally does not. He is not moved at all, and neither does Rami Malek. But the other people in the apartment are shocked by the light coming on. And the year is 1990. We see flashbacks because when they walk into, there's a weird thing that happens in a kind of magical realism sense here. When they walk into the apartment, there are families like sitting at tables, like they're walking through another apartment. And I can't figure out in the movie whether these people are there or not. And we learn as we go through that Denzel sees dead people. He sees these victims, but as if they're alive. And is this something that he literally sees, or we're just seeing this in a sort of spiritual viewpoint, like he's a kind of true detective, meandering through the murky waters of death in order to find the people to bring them out. And so he what does he do? He's looking around the room. He asks if they dusted the windowsill for fingerprints. They haven't. Rami Malek tells the cop the first two are, on the scene. He tells him, like, he says this weird thing about, which is, it seems like it's exposition for his character, but it's actually not in the movie. He says, you need to understand that from the moment she died to the moment we have the guy in cuffs, whoever it is, that we are the sentinels of this place, and that we work for this woman. We work for her. And it seems like almost so cheesy in the movie, but he's actually being completely sincere here. And Denzel notices the fingerprints on the window, and that the guy obviously went out through the window, or that he was by the window, and he looks and he sees an apartment building across the street. He does this crazy thing. This is very good acting. He does this thing where he looks up, he sees the window, and he kind of cocks his head to the side, and we realize that he is seeing into the apartment from the perspective of the apartment across the street, even though he's standing there. So he crosses the alley, he goes down, crosses the abyss, and oh no, dude, I just got a bad text. Oh, that dude, oh no, my friend's mom just passed away. That's not good. All right, I'm gonna get to that. I probably shouldn't have read that out loud, but that's not good. Anyway, so I pray for her. So anyway, so he goes across the alley, and he looks up. He goes up into the apartment, and the apartment is all completely. It's a death cave. It's all dark, and there's a chair overturned with spider webs all over it. So he's ascended, but he's in this hellish viewing region. Like he's looking at the apartment across the street. So he's looking through the windows of his soul. He's looking through the looking glass into the real world from this hellish apartment building. And then Rami Malek comes down and he says, "So what'd you find there, Kojak?" Kojak. Mom's apple pie, 4th of July. She's a hooker! Yeah, it's a creeper nest. Exactly. And so Denzel knows for sure. He can't prove it because they can't really find any prints up there, but he knows that this is it. So what happens in the movie is essentially that Denzel is supposed to take the evidence back up to where he was for this other case, but I guess he either does that or whatever, but that becomes irrelevant because he's now here, and he goes and he finds a place to stay for the night. He trawls through the streets, and it becomes a sort of taxi driver scene where he where one day a real rain's gonna come and wash the scum off the streets. I need to do that movie, by the way. If you guys can remind me afterwards, do Taxi Driver. I need to do Taxi Driver. And he goes to an apartment where there's a whole bunch of workers outside, and a hotel, and the hotel is the St. Agnes Hotel. So, and St. Agnes, the saint for women. He goes up into the protector of women. He goes up into the hotel. First thing he sees when he walks in is, and we know he's been in this hotel room before, he sees a painting of Christ and an angel on the wall, and he smiles. And then he lies down in the bed, bathed in sickly green light. In green, we've covered green so much. Green is the kind of Renaissance medieval vapor of sickness, corruption, and death. And we've seen that in American Psycho. We've seen it in Dracula. We've seen it in so many works that we've covered. And he's lying there, and he's got pictures of these girls on the wall, these victims on the wall, and he starts talking to them. And then they literally appear to him. So he's lying there, and we know that this guy's mission is to solve the case, and we find out his mission explicitly, which is that he's become an avenging angel for them. Shouts out to Rachel out there, who drops $10 super chat. Hey, shouts out to Rachel out there. We love Rachel. We love our Rachel, our based homeschool mama, who is we've been celebrating Rachel's continued success and arc ever upwards. So thank you to Rachel. Really appreciate you. Thank you so much, Rachel and Andy. Been a long time since I've enjoyed a BLA stream. Been busy. Please support my homie, guys. He's the best in the game. That's very sweet. Thank you so much, Rachel. Really appreciate that. Thank you. You are been a very good friend to me. So Thank you to Rachel. Really, everybody, of course, everybody here is already with Rachel, based homeschool mama. Based homeschool mom, Rachel. Rachel for patriarchy on Twitter. I don't have Twitter. I'm thinking about getting back on there, um, but anyway, yes. Shouts out to Rachel and Andy. Thank you so much. Really really love you guys and your support. So he's lying there in this green light, and we learned that he's the avenging angel for these women, and he tells Rami Malek, "Don't become an angel." What he means by that is Rami Malek goes and talks to the detective, a couple of detectives, about Denzel, and they say, "Do you know this guy? Do you know anything about him? This guy was in a case, and he was trying to solve this case where there was a killer of women, and he got a divorce, a heart attack, and a triple bypass all within 6 months, and now he's out of here. Don't associate with him. He's dangerous, and you don't want to end up like him." Basically, he confronts Denzel on this bridge overlooking the murder scene, because Denzel always has perspective. He takes him to this bridge overlooking this chasm, and he says, "You see that lady on the behind me over my left shoulder? Yeah, she's up in the window right there, right? She's the nosy neighbor." Well, there was a convergence of events that happened the night this happened, right? 1 in a million, 1 in a million. Basically, that there was no mud down by the river, so there was no place for footprints. And the lady who's there every night watching over everything was not there. And that type of lady is a godsend for people like us, but she wasn't there. She's there now watching us, but she wasn't there. Don't become like me. Right. So what happens is basically that Denzel goes back to the apartment. He says that he's going back home, but he goes back to the apartment. And he goes in, and he's going to spend some time there just sitting. And he sits in this chair, and it looks like he's praying in the chair, and he's just sitting there. Then the landlady comes in, and he says, "I need to requisition the beer from this fridge for evidence." And she's like, "Yeah, evidence." So he sits there, drinks a couple beers, and he says, "What's up with the food? And why does it smell so bad in this fridge?" Right? Because the milk's gone off. There's milk and there's Busch Light in the fridge. And the lady tells him, "Well, the fridge was broken. They put it in order, and then they never got to it or whatever." And he says, "Really? Who'd you put in the order with?" He says, "It's the little things that matter," right? So he finds the name of a couple of the fridge repairman companies, and he goes and he visits them. He sees one. He goes in. He's looking around. He sees that it's not. Something's not right, meaning wrong here. So it's fine. And then he looks in his rearview mirror and he sees another one. There's ABC, and then there's AAA. So then he goes into the AAA repairman shop. He's looking around, and then as he's leaving, as he's walking out, he hears something. He turns around and he goes back, and he sees all the people in the back that were workers. There's one that he didn't see. And then he doesn't look at him directly, but turns around, and that's Jared Leto. Jared Leto turns back and looks and sees him. So now there's a shark and a shark hunting each other. So he has a feeling he's onto his man. Now, in the next part of the movie, he's driving around. He decides to follow Jared Leto's character everywhere. Jared Leto is very, fits all the descriptions of what we would see as the guy who did this. He's got this weird walk. The movie starts off with a killing that takes place in the early 70s, a kind of Zodiac killing where a woman is driving along, is it the 70s or is it I don't know when it takes place, but there's a woman driving on a road, and there's a guy kind of trying to Kurt Russell in Death Proof style, like run her off the road. Eventually she stops at a gas station, and then she runs into the desert, into the wilderness again. He finds her, and then she's gone. And they bring in, and we see his boots, and we know that the boots kind of look like Jared Leto's boots, and he's kind of hobbling around. Now, whenever you see anybody in a movie like this who's a suspect and they have some sort of physical injury, it reminds me of Ted Bundy, who I'm going to get to next, because it's throwing them off. And anyway, so he follows Jared Leto. Jared Leto's character does this thing where he takes him on a long ride, and he knows he's being tailed, and he ends up at a mile marker. The mile marker is like 146, and Denzel stops, waits for him to drive past, but Jared Leto's on the other side of the road, and then they cross, So they're circling each other, and then he calls into the police station, and they say, "Where was the lady found? Where was it closest to?" It was mile marker 146. He's right. He took him right to it, right? Eventually, he makes his way into the house. He breaks into the house, and he finds a secret stash beside a TV, or beside there's a screen on the wall where he's showing like he's been looking at old family movies, which also reminds me of Bundy. And he sees that he's been collecting evidence from all of the murders, and it's a hideaway. Basically, long story short, whenever we see Rami Malek's character, we see him bathed in light at home. He's got a wife and he's got 2 kids. Denzel also has 2 kids. He also had a wife. Now that's gone. And whenever we see Denzel's character, he looks like he is hiding from himself. He's always got a hat on way down low. He's got sunglasses on, and he's kind of operating in a shadow of himself, even though he's in broad daylight. Rami Malek's character is there for everybody to see. He's got this house painted white. It's all beautiful, and we can see the trajectory here of what might become if he's not careful. Denzel even goes to visit his ex-wife, and he kind of weirdly stumbles over the mulch in the front. He talks to her from a distance. So he's physically distant from her, just like he's mentally, psychically, spiritually distant from her. And eventually, they pretty much nail down that this is the guy, but they can't get any hard evidence. They can't get any proof. And Denzel meets with one of his old colleagues who was the coroner for the murder that he just was at. And they go and eat in this restaurant. He's drinking coffee, and she holds like a key fob at him, a little keychain. It looks like a rose, but it's actually a bullet. And we learn later the twist. Here's the twist in the movie. Here's the twist. Spoiler. Here's the twist in the movie. The twist is that Denzel and all these people were involved. And what happened was he was investigating the murder. He went down by the river. He saw 2 girls posed on a rock like it was an altar, and we see there's kind of hints of glyphs around like it's an occult murder. This is happening in a series, and then he gets distracted by one of his detectives, and he hears a noise. He looks up, and it's one of the victims, but he shoots her in the chest. He thinks he shoots by instinct, and he kills one of the victims who did survive the initial. They'd been stabbed in the stomach. So then the coroner, his friend, rules that she died by stabbing, and they hide it, so they bury it. So the burial of this and the murder is what has destroyed him. It's not like True Detective where he can't find the guy. It's that he is inadvertently taken part in this. And eventually he stalks Jared Leto. He gets pulled away for a minute. Rami Malek gets in a car with Jared Leto, who's going to take him to the site. And it's a gravel road. It's out in the wilderness. It's a big gravel, sort of paved over gravel pit. And he says, I think, if you dig right here, you'll find her. And he basically is playing mind games with him, and he makes him dig like all these holes, and there's nobody there. And then he threatens Rami Malek and says that he's found his kids and all this stuff, and that he was a true crime buff. He says he's never killed anybody in his life. And eventually Rami Malek, when he says the thing about his kids, he hits him with the shovel and he kills him. Denzel comes to his rescue and then leaves, goes to the guy's apartment, sanitizes the apartment, takes all of his stuff, burns it, comes back, throws the guy in the grave, and they leave. And then he says, go back and take some time off. Now there's another guy who's taking his place, so it's a lineage of these broken detectives. But we have a feeling Rami Malek is going to go back to work, but he's going to replay the same thing that Denzel did. And he's got that 1,000-yard stare because now he's taking part in it. Denzel ends the movie by sending him a letter saying no angels, and gives him there's a bag with a beret in it. There's a beret in it. And the next twist is that when we see him back at home burning all the materials, he's bought the beret. So he didn't actually find the evidence. He just sent it to him to try and, I guess, evangelize him in a sense, right? He tries to, and it's a ruse. So the question is, and the movie ends, it's an ambiguous movie, which I think kind of annoyed me the first time I saw it, but I see what he's doing here in light of what I've just read, and it's Ted Bundy, which is that the question is this a noble lie, right? And is he now becoming the angel of the life secular angel of Jared Leto? I mean, of Rami Malek. And also, was Jared Leto's character, this guy Sparma, was he guilty? So my take in the movie is that he was guilty. He was the guy. And the reason I think that is because not only all the evidence and the fact that he says he's a true crime buff and all this stuff, it's like, okay, that's meant to throw us off. Like, no, he's just interested in this stuff. But that is completely in line with many of the things that McGowan says in Program to Kill, and all of his behavior matches it. And the fact that he the fact that he says at the end he's never killed anybody is not to be taken seriously. He's just been lying for all this time. So his credibility's gone, and the lying thing brings me to my next point, which is Bundy. Because Bundy, in a sense, did the exact same thing. And a lot of these guys do the exact same thing. It doesn't matter whether they don't admit to it or not. And they don't find the evidence, which is part of the twist. I think that's the real twist in this thing, is that they probably have found the right. There's like 4 twists. The 4th twist is that I think that they have found the right guy, and that they did exact this vengeance on him, and now he's in a rocky place, just like he had the women posed in this rocky place. He is you have to look down into the hidey hole in his apartment for the newspaper clippings that he's followed, and he's followed all of the things. And also the big thing is that this is pretty brilliant and very dark. They bring him in for questioning. They bring in another guy for questioning who Denzel is behind the two-way mirror, and he mentions someone's name, and then we find out that guy's unalived himself. But that guy was involved in creeper shit, and so he's gone. So he's avenged them in some sense, but he wasn't the guy involved in this. But he was a witness to this in one way, and that brings him further on to bringing Jared Leto into the movie in the same scene. But the contrast is that Jared Leto is clued in to how the interrogation takes place, and he's playing mind games with them. Thank you, Rachel, so much for the 5 memberships. Appreciate you. Just saw that. Gifted 5 memberships. Thank you so much, Rachel. Really appreciate that. Hey, thank you for being here. Everybody who's a new member, really appreciate you. And I got exclusive member content coming up this week. I'm going to do maybe tomorrow night. We'll see. I'm going to do an analysis of Jeff Buckley's Grace. If anybody's interested, I'm going to do it anyway. But if anybody's interested, I'm going to do an analysis of that album and a couple other things. But anyway, so when they show him the crime scene and the murder victims, Jared Leto's looking at it, and Denzel gets right up in his face, and all of a sudden he reaches down real quick, and he says, "You son of a," he says, "I knew it. I can't do it, Denzel." He's got this thing, and he says, "I knew it." And what we get is that Jared Leto was physically affected, let's say, by looking at the pictures of the dead ladies. And he is he's a physical verified creep right here. So that's all the evidence that Denzel thinks that he needs to get into this. And so my take at the end of the movie is that he was the guy, and that the lie that he sends Rami Malek is a form of noble lie, trying to ease his pain from what he was into, and from what he did, which was killing him without the evidence. But the movie kind of shows you that it's sort of outside the bounds of normal justice here, and I think it's a pretty clever movie. So if you've seen the movie, or if you go and watch the movie, The Little Things, 2021, it's The Little Things, then let me know in the comments afterwards what you think and who actually did it. And so the last thing I'm going to cover here is about Bundy, because I also watched the Zac Efron movie again about Bundy that came out in 2019, and I've watched the Bundy tapes, and I read the Stranger Beside Me by Anne Rule when I was like in 6th grade, and and of course, Program to Kill here. And one thing that made me do this is, have you guys seen the? It's a YouTube short. Have you seen the clip of Bundy in his last interview talking about? They're asking about one of his victims who was very young. One of his victims. And have you seen him talking about this? I'm sure you've come across it because it's pretty big short. But it's I'm not going to show it here because I don't want to show his face on here, and I definitely don't want to show this face. I don't, fuck this guy. But the title of it is "Face of the Devil" appears at the end of Bundy's thing, and I gotta say that this sort of thing affected me. He's being interviewed. It's just a short, and he says he's not going to talk about it. And at the end of it, there's a freeze frame, and it's half a second, and there's a freeze frame on his face. And the face really does, it really did affect me. And it's because my take on this is that, and this is aside from McGowan's thesis, this is aside from Phoenix Program, is aside from all that. What my final take on Bundy is that although McGowan is right, and all of his I think in his research, and I believe his research about Program to Kill and all of the interconnectedness with those people, especially with Berkowitz, and it's interesting that Berkowitz is operating at the same time as Bundy, and they both have the yellow beetle, and all of this stuff. There's all these weird things, and I think that there was a network, but I think that there's obviously a network. But I think with Bundy, what I think happened with Bundy is that he was the worst. He is the absolute yellow Volkswagen Beetle. He is the absolute worst of this whole phenomenon, in the sense that I think that what made him that, I don't know, and I don't want to psychoanalyze, but we know that, and McGowan brings this up, we know that he thought that his mother was his sister, and I think that his granddad, he thought that his granddad was his dad, but I think his granddad probably actually was his dad, and that his mother really was his sister. And his granddad was military. There's military tie-ins with this, but I think there were the terrible things that happened to him were very young, and I think that this result, apart from the things that made him, I think that what resulted was that I can't find a more potent example of somebody who really was a shark swimming through society. I think that he may have been the one example of this who either didn't have connections with the other people, or if he did, they were tenuous, or he knew, and that he existed in a way that was completely double-sided. So yes, DID and all that. But I think that the one time that I've ever seen when his true face appeared, and I think this is I think there's, Ted Bundy talks about, he talked in his interviews about how he was possessed by something called the entity. And this is just like Dennis Rader being possessed by Batter X, right? Who he said he was possessed by a demon. Son of Sam was explicitly possessed by a demon through his process church, his satanic rituals. And I think that when Ted Bundy is in court saying that he's the person appearing in front of you is not the guy who did this, he's both telling the truth and lying, because the person standing in front of them is not the person to appearances who did this. It's the other person inside of him who did it. But there's a synthesis of those two people, and one is a demon and one is him. And I believe that. And this face at the end of this thing really, if you look at, I mean, maybe you won't think this, but it really did. I don't want to say the word scare. It didn't scare me. But I thought that this was probably the truest face of a of a demon incarnate that I've seen in a long time on film, and this is a sort of face I think that if you see, then I saw this and I thought it was absolute horror. I recognize this. I recognize this face. That you might see this and go, that's totally insane. I don't know. I don't know what you think, but I think that if you look at this, you know, this is people describe Bundy as having his phenotype, his physiognomy would change. You know, they said that it happened in court one time. It's not on camera. You can't see it happen in court, but that there are recollections of people involved in the court case where his eyes, he had bright blue eyes, and his eyes literally turned black. His physical body would change into a beast. The way that he was able to cosmetically change himself, you know, with the disguises and the, you know, fake cast and all that stuff that's all one thing. He took acting lessons. That's all one thing. The fact that he appears, but it's like when he met old Sparky finally, when he sat in that 3-legged chair and rode the lightning right beforehand, and he's smiling. I think that, you know, he's feigning everything. This is an actual psychopath. This is probably the clearest example of an actual psychopath, where it's not just the psyche. This guy is infected with a demon, and I think that is the face that his victims saw. You know that when Bundy died, you know what his final wishes were? His final wish was that his body would be cremated and would be scattered. His ashes would be scattered on the Cascade Mountain where he'd buried his victims. Now, the victims hopefully had been exhumed, and they'd gathered all of and they'd interred them and they'd buried them, so they're not there with him. But that alone, you know, is, you know, yeah, he didn't have the altars, like the physical, not the DID altars. I'm talking about an altar, ALTAR, that Dahmer had. He didn't have that, but he had something that was actually much more, a kind of altar that was much more true, which is a whole mountain, a whole Walpurgis mountain. And then he goes on this rampage in Florida, and that's also strange dealing with Phoenix, because there are accounts of the victims would often misidentify him, and one of the people they misidentified or identified was a sheriff's deputy who had his whole other story. There's also a guy named Creech who was involved with this. So it is. There were multiple people operating in the country, and this is all result of Phoenix and there's a network. I mean, look at the Son of Sam thing. That, you know, the people that identified Son of Sam described him not at all like Son of Sam. And he says that there were two. He says in his later interviews that there were other people operating with him, and then he doesn't name them. They were all part of the cult. This guy Creech said that he witnessed his wife or girlfriend being something by 14 guys in a gang and thrown out a 14-story window, and that ties in with Straight Satan's and Charlie Manson, because he was working for a motorcycle gang, and I think a lot of his victims were he was going through the perpetrators. But with Bundy, this is somebody who physically could change his type, his body type, to get through the window. He escaped twice from jail. I'm not sure about the stuff in Florida, which is crazy, because he went on a complete rampage there in the Chi Omega house. But the psychopathy and as Crispy says, process dog training, and again, the crazy thing about Berkowitz, which I saw him again reiterate in an interview, is that he said that he hates the term Son of Sam because it represents, and who knows people's heart. I tend to believe, actually, Berkowitz's conversion. I tend to believe it. I in sincerity. I don't know. We can't know that, but I tend to believe it because he talks about how he was involved in this cult and how he hates the name because the media made it out, and the people that interview these people never understand what the people are telling them. So when he told them that, he heard the messages from the dog. It's not that the dog was talking to him. It's that Samhain, the demon, whom he called Sam, and he's the son of Sam, is speaking through the dog. And that he is gathering souls for his slavery in hell. And that ties in with, that made me think of SCREWTAPE Letters, because there's a part of SCREWTAPE Letters where SCREWTAPE talks about the ultimate goal of this is consumption of human souls. They want to eat souls. And one of the things Ted Bundy says, especially in the Zac Efron movie, he says that when he was talking to one of the detectives, and the detective asked him who he was and what he was doing, and this is one of the things that Bundy, when he was his own lawyer, when he was defending himself, he asked to be in. They made it inadmissible in court because they cut off the recording. And then they said they were surreptitiously recording them because there were bugs in the detective's office. He says he told the detective that he was a vampire, and everybody laughs in court, and the detective thinks that this guy's insane. He's, he thinks he's Dracula. But I think he was telling the truth there, that he is a vampire. He's a spiritual, psychic vampire feeding on human souls to satiate his lust for the destruction of creation, that he's trying to, he literally, he was a cannibal, a necro, all these things. I think that he was really, this was a demon person who was eating souls. So, Program to Kill sort of goes into this a lot. I mean, you should read Program to Kill. But I'm just going to read a section here of Program to Kill, and you should watch the clip. Look up the YouTube short, Face of the Devil appears at the end of Ted Bundy's interview. And look at the face that appears. I think that's a face that you all will recognize. I think when I saw that face, that's a face I recognize. Get out of here. Go back to hell. And I think that's it. That's the actual person. So, page 184. It says, Theodore Robert Bundy was yet another serial killer whose parentage remains obscured. He entered this world in 1946 at the Elizabeth Lund Home for Unwed Mothers, and he was promptly abandoned there for 3 months by his mother, Eleanor Cowell. He was raised to believe that his mother's father, Sam Cowell, was his father as well, which he may, in fact, have been. Chronicler Anne Rule, there's problems with Anne Rule, but Anne Rule has written, she wrote The Stranger Beside Me, has written that the identity of Ted's real father was unknown outside of the family, and that he was a shadowy man whose real identity grows more blurred with every year that passes, end quote. Throughout his life, Bundy described his church deacon, father, grandfather in glowing terms, while other family members have characterized him as a horrendously violent and abusive man who terrorized his family and was sadistic to animals. Now, that's probably true how Bundy describes him in glowing terms. He's Luminate confirmed. He's glowing in the sense that he made him, if that's the interpretation. Sam Cowell's own brothers reportedly stated on numerous occasions that somebody should kill him to spare others further mystery. That's a quote from the book. In October 1950, Ted's mother began calling herself Louise and legally changed her son's name from Theodore Robert Cowell to Theodore Robert Nelson for no discernible reason. The next year, she married Johnny Culpepper Bundy and changed Ted's name once again. Johnny, a former Navy man and a member of the large clan of Tacoma Bundys, was employed at, of all places, a military hospital at a joint Army-Air Force complex. Ted attended Woodrow Wilson High School in Tacoma, Washington, at least according to his former classmates he did. And this Washington element reminds me of what we just covered in the grunge stream when they were talking about the Green River Killer, whom Ted Bundy had that whole thing with about helping to catch him. That cannot be verified, however, since all records of Bundy's enrollment there have strangely disappeared. After graduation, he worked for a municipal electric company. In spring of 1967, Ted met a woman identified by the pseudonym Stephanie Brooks. She was the daughter of a wealthy California family and was just one of many women who would be drawn into Ted's orbit. In the summer of 1968, Bundy received a scholarship to attend Dr. Lund's Stanford University, just as that tiny geographic region of the country was about to become the serial killer capital of the world. Ted purportedly attended Stanford for sessions in intensive Chinese studies, although nothing else in his biography hints at any interest in Chinese studies. That same year, Ted traveled to Florida to attend the Republican National Convention as a supporter of presidential candidate Nelson Rockefeller. At about the same time, he worked as a driver and bodyguard for Art Flesher, Fletcher, a candidate for lieutenant governor in the state of Washington. In 1969, Bundy traveled to Aspen, Colorado for an extended stay after telling friends that he'd been hired as a ski instructor, which turned out to be a lie. The real reason for Ted's stay in Aspen remains unknown. He also paid a visit to Arkansas that year, reportedly to visit relatives. Maybe he was in Mena hanging out with Bubba and W. Senior, and maybe he was in Aspen hanging out with Hunter S. Thompson. I don't know. Right? Remember Rusty Nelson? We covered Hunter S. Thompson and Generation of Swine and all that, but also Rusty Nelson was the guy who said that Hunter S. Thompson was an 8mm filmmaker, let's say, and the parts in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas about Adreno, and also his parts in the parts in the biography of Hunter S. Thompson that I have up here that I covered in that stream is by the journalist, and she's the journalist that sued Trump earlier this year. And one of the things Thompson goes on trial for during the course of the book and her stay with him is R word and 8mm activity. And he's constantly making references to that. Now, I don't know. Maybe that's just satire. But it's odd to say the least, right? Also, speaking of, I just remembered, it is crazy that C.S. Lewis, total tangent here, but isn't it crazy that C.S. Lewis died on the same day as JFK and Aldous Huxley? Also, this is crazy. I learned this today. Did you know that C.S. Lewis's wife's first husband, Gresham, was the guy who wrote Nightmare Alley and the guy who wrote the Houdini book that I covered, and that he was highly interested in Al Crowley activities and I Ching and was a so-called spiritualist, and that their son, the one that C.S. Lewis adopted, and he's in the movie Shadowlands, the kid, turns out to be a dangerous schizophrenic, a dangerous psychopathic schizophrenic, I think they described him as. He's the son of the Gresham guy. So this says, in September 1969, another woman entered Ted Bundy's orbit, variously identified as Liz Kendall or Meg Anders. This is page 185 of the book. She was the daughter of a prominent doctor in the Mormon stronghold of Ogden, Utah. Despite her social standing, her estranged husband was a convicted felon. Meg Liz apparently did not have the best taste in men. In 1971, Ted began working at the Seattle Crisis Clinic as a paid work-study student. He remained there throughout May 1972. His work partner at the clinic was none other than Ann Rule, a policewoman come true crime reporter whose brother had been recently killed, allegedly by his own hand, at where else? Stanford University, SRI. Stanford University. Not at SRI, but it's at Stanford, where SRI was. Ted left the crisis center to intern at Harborview County Hospital as a psychiatric counselor. His salary there was funded by a federal grant. He also worked that year as a key organizer for Washington Governor Dan Evans' re-election campaign. His job was specifically to spy and gather intelligence on the governor's opponent. Governor Evans later personally wrote Ted a glowing letter of recommendation to a Utah law school. As noted earlier in the chapter, Ted worked for a variety of city, state, and county law enforcement entities. In April 1973, he became a special assistant to the Washington Republican Party chairman Ross Davis, whom Ted frequently dined with and whose children, amazingly enough, he occasionally babysat. This reminds me of Brian Kohberger, the guy on trial right now for the Idaho killings. Not at a sorority house, but at a house. And I've covered them on Alternate Current Radio with Hesher a bunch of times. I've been following the Kohberger case, but there are striking similarities between Kohberger and Bundy. I mean, they even have a similar. They don't look the same, but they have a similar, a similar. I don't know what to call it. Not phenotype. They have there's a similar look, and he was, of course, Brian Kohberger was the student of the main. Crime consultant, true crime and murder consultant, psychology professor on Court TV. So every time you watch Kohberger on Court TV, they can't have this professor on there because she was his mentor there, his mentor. But the way that he stalked, or allegedly, and all this stuff is similar to Bundy, especially with being Ted Bundy was also a student in an abnormal psychology, a class on abnormal psychology. And we recently watched a clip of the professor talking about how when he was teaching a class I think in the early 70s, that the class was going through, yes, exactly, Elon, yep, LOL Field and Love, excellent channel. Excellent channel on Program to Kill. Shouts out to LOL Field and Love, long time channel discussing McGowan. I got a lot from them over the years going way back. So he was a student in his class, and this was at a time when students were first starting to come up with the idea that they needed to grade themselves. The grades were ridiculous, and the guy says that the class was turning on him, and that a voice spoke up from the back of the class and said, no, we need objective grades to measure our progress if we want any hope in working in this field or actually learning anything. And that guy was Ted Bundy. And that he says that they talked all the time. He was his favorite student. And then eventually when he heard about the murders and everything, he reported it. He reported it and reported him. And because the drawing was close to him, and he says, but this can't be him. And that the cops said to him, what's the class? And he said abnormal psychology. And they said, well, did he act abnormal in the class? What a weird question. No, he said, no, he didn't act abnormal. In fact, he acted completely normal. But that's what I'm talking about. Right. Of course he did. The mask was seriously intact. And a lot of times, ironically, the poetical thing about this is that the times when the mask slipped, especially during the trial, the times when the mask slipped were when he lost face. How poetical. So, for instance, in the Zac Efron movie, they dramatized when his mother came in and confronted him in the jail cell and said, you need to plead guilty so you don't get the chair. And he's talking to his new baby mama, who he had a child with, born in 1982, and his mother, and then he explodes on her when she leaves because he's lost face. So losing face makes the mask slip. In July of that year, Bundy again flew to San Francisco just as the dust was settling from the flurry of ritual murders that had terrorized that city. Just after this return to Washington, women began disappearing from the Seattle-Tacoma area. Before that time, the Seattle area had experienced very few murders, but that was about to change dramatically. This is post-Phoenix. The body of the first, or during Phoenix, the body of the first victim attributed to Bundy was found in December 6, 1973. Arthur Shawcross is one of these guys who claims outright that he was in the Phoenix program. Catherine Mary Devine had last been seen 2 weeks earlier in getting into a pickup truck after running away from home. The man with whom she willingly accepted the ride was not Ted Bundy. Her body was found to be missing its heart, lungs, and liver, purportedly attributable to scavenging animals. If so, those scavengers were very selective. That's what Bundy said about the woman who was missing the head. And then he admits that, at least in the film, I've never read that. I don't remember reading that he admitted that it was a hacksaw. Next to disappear was Linda Healy in the early morning hours of February 1st, 1974. Linda was abducted from the home she shared with others. Bundy allegedly entered the house undetected by any of the home's other occupants, crept noiselessly downstairs, overpowered and killed Linda without waking a roommate sleeping just on the other side of the thin plywood partition, and without leaving behind any signs of a struggle, wrapped her body, carried it back upstairs, and then returned still unnoticed to make her bed, hang up her nightgown, and grab a change of clothes for her. And then let's see. The only remains of her found were her skull and positive identification of that skull was based on a single tooth. Remember the tooth marks with Bundy that they made, which he tried in his trial to have thrown out, but they did the tooth mark, and he had bitten them. And this is in line with his vampirical statement. Let's see. Each of the, page 187, each of the 7 girls that disappeared thus far, Devine, Healy, Manson, Rancourt, Parks, Ball, and Hawkins, Manson, had vanished without a single clue having been left behind. There were no witnesses and no forensics evidence to tie anyone to any of the crime scenes. In some of the cases, it could not even be determined when or where the crime had occurred. All of that was going to change. Janice Ott and Denise Naslund were both reportedly disappeared from a very crowded lake, Samamish. I don't know the name of this park. Sammamish. I don't know how you say that. Sammamish Park in broad daylight in front of literally thousands of potential witnesses, including a sizable chunk of the Seattle police force. Next page, it says, no one saw her leave or get into the car with anyone, which would not have fit into Bundy's which disappeared along with her, which would not have fit into Bundy's Volkswagen. Remember, Real John Connor says, Janice? Yeah. They found him in the last place they looked, which is, why didn't they just start there? Says Norm. No, but remember Debbie Harry, of all people. Debbie Harry, the lead singer of Blondie, says that she was one of the potential victims. She was actually picked up, and she later identified who it was, because when she saw he was arrested years later, she was picked up, not hitchhiking, she was picked up somewhere. She got in a yellow Volkswagen. It was Bundy, and that the inside of the car had no door handles, and that she felt something was wrong, tried to pry open the window, and then opened the door from the outside, and that when they turned the corner, he threw her out of the car, and then drove away. So she was almost a victim. So that's Debbie Harry said that. And have I been showing? Am I such a slow boy that I was showing Denzel and him the whole time? I'm sorry. I'm so slow. I'm so slow. I am here. Okay. Thanks for pointing that out, because I get so into the book here and into talking, I don't recognize the little things, as they say. Last place they looked. All right. Thank you so much for bringing that up. I'm totally boomer teching it here. That was such a boomer tech moment. Okay. It says, let's see. They had the TED Squad. I don't want to go into the details of that too much. And among the very first TEDs to be reported to the squad was Theodore Robert Bundy by his purported friend Ann Rule. Over the course of the investigation, 4 others would report Bundy as well: his fiancée, the pseudonymous Liz Kendall, a college professor, and a colleague of the Department of Emergency Services. The fact that only the skulls of the girls were ever found fueled the belief of some that the killings were cult-related. Rule's book refers derisively to, quote, totally unsubstantiated rumors that the missing and murdered girls had been sacrificed and their headless bodies dumped, waded into the almost bottomless waters of Lake Washington. Chronicler Michaud, however, offered a different take. Occultism or Satan worship creeds that local police say have long found a small but ardent following of practitioners around Seattle. He added that many people were convinced that a virulent offshoot of the Charlie Manson family had moved to the Seattle area and had begun a new reign of terror led by Ted. Well, they did go to Seattle. Remember, that's where they vacationed. Some of the Seattle police force were convinced that there was occult involvement in the murders. A hefty file on occult activities in the area had been assembled, cryptically referred to as File 1004. The occult theories, though, were ridiculed by county police and prosecutors. The skulls were recovered and removed. And if he says later on this page, if it was Ted Bundy who held her for that duration of time, then he most certainly had accomplices. Just the day after the girl's disappearance, Bundy left on a hunting trip with his fiance's father. The slain girl was perhaps significantly and perhaps not the daughter of the police chief of Midvale, Utah. And of course, he did claim at one point that he was part of a network, just like your boy Henry Lee Lucas. When Max Call, who wrote the book on Henry Lee Lucas, was talking about the Hand of Death cult. So the Hand of Death cult, I know you guys remember this, but Hand of Death cult was what Henry Lee Lucas said was a satanic cult tied in with Phoenix Program and intelligence and spec ops, and they trained in the Florida Everglades. He also claimed that he witnessed George Bush Sr. there. And that when he did the story with him, that Max Call says, is that Henry Lee Lucas, who was the guy who was responsible for the abduction and decapitation of John Walsh, the guy on America's Most Wanted. I think I have that right. Of him, that's when I got him started off on that. But him and Otis Toole, they call him Otis Toole. They had receipts and payment for their whole operation, and Henry Lee Lucas claimed that he was involved in 360 unalives and personally involved in, I think, 150 of them. And the reason that George W. Bush commuted his sentence from Old Sparky was that good boy Henry Lee Lucas was that he said that they had haystacked him. So again, haystacking is when you have a bunch of crimes and then a guy gets caught for a bunch, but then you try to pin them all on him to take care of it, so you can tie them all up. And that this wasn't misinfo on the part of Henry Lee Lucas. That Henry Lee Lucas claimed to Max Call that he was in his jail cell and that he said Christ visited him in the form of light, and that he was in his prison cell, and that he was freezing cold and it was totally pitch black darkness, but that a being of light came to him and told him that and then Henry Lee Lucas says that he got on his knees and he said, I can't do it anymore. I don't know what to do. I can't do it anymore, Lord. And that the being of light told him that you've got to confess to everything you've ever done, right? So Max Call says that when he took them to these places, and that one of the things they used in the case was that they prompted him. But Henry Lee Lucas had like a 4th grade education. His mind was so clouded with all of the depravity and with all of his drug use that he couldn't remember. So when they said, was there anybody in Tacoma? That later on he remembered that and said, oh, there was somebody in Tacoma. But that actually he meant this sincerely because he couldn't remember what he'd done. And because he told the being of light, he said, I don't remember what I've done. I'm a simple man. And the being told him, I'll help you remember. So when they said Tacoma, Washington, for example, he thought, well, that's God trying to help me remember. So he confessed to them all. Right. You talking about Lyndon B. Johnson? Yeah, listen to the Lyndon. Yeah, Hittori. Yeah, if you guys have heard everybody's heard the Watergate tapes, but listen to the Lyndon tapes. Gotta listen to the LBJ tapes. Those are funny. Anyway, but my point in tying all this together is that the movie, The Little Things, ties in a kind of weird version of Screwtape and Wormwood, or a Virgil and a Virgil and Dante character, and that the killer shown in that is sort of exemplified by the Bundy character, right? And that one of the things that he talks about in Screwtape is that, again, that it's not the worst people that destroy humanity's faith. It's the little things, and that the worst people are going to do the thing. But I think that Ted Bundy is certainly not only a kind of pure as a kind of a pure, meaning purely corrupt example of demon and DID and possibly Phoenix, as McGowan points out, weird consistencies with those or inconsistencies, and a true shark operating. It would be like Bundy is a kind of like if Wormwood were to do exact his MO as he sees it, and he's constantly being berated by his uncle Screwtape in the book, then that would be what Bundy is in the book. But in the end of the book, of course, Wormwood gets admonished by Screwtape because they've lost him. And in fact, these sorts of things that God can turn good, evil into good, right? Can turn evil things, can make them good. There's good that comes out of them. And that's one of the things that C.S. Lewis is consistent upon in terms of his lectures on the meaning of pain and the meaning of tragedy in life, right? That, read the book of Job. So that will probably do it, I guess, tonight for Screwtape Letters, C.S. Lewis, The Little Things 2021, and my my little segue there into Ted Bundy and Program to Kill. If you haven't read Program to Kill by Dave McGowan, I mean, that's one of the cornerstone books here, that you should read. I would read the Screwtape Letters, to blot all that out, all that content out, and give you something uplifting. So, shouts out to Kira right there who drops $10, says Screwtape stream fire. Shouts out to Kira right there. Thank you so much. You are the best. Really appreciate you for that support via Venmo. Thank you so much. That is so awesome. What's this? Hold on. Yo, yeah, shouts out to what's this? Yeah. Okay, shouts out. Yeah, and again, shouts out to everybody who supported me on PayPal. And thank you to Rachel for buying those memberships for people. Really appreciate that. If you are a member, please join me again. I'll put it up in time for you to see. Make sure your notifications are on because that will help a lot. And I'll be doing streams coming up on, I'll be doing a pure literary stream on the poetics of Ezra Pound. I've covered Ezra Pound before in relation to a bunch of other people, but I'll be doing the poetics of Ezra Pound, getting back into some pure poetry here. Shouts out to Roscoe P. Cotrain, big supporter, longtime supporter. Thanks for the stream, BLA. Thank you, Roscoe P. Cotrain, big time, longtime supporter, OG here for that $40 Canadian. Really, thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Shouts out to Circle G for that $5. Says, back to what you to art and liturgy. Could you say that Psalms, liturgy, etc. are like the forms? To what I was saying about art and liturgy, can I say they're like the forms? I don't know. I don't know if I'm listen, man, I'm just a guy who, I'm just a guy who likes to play with crayons and at home and get when you get glue on your fingers and you peel it off, right? And I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I think that's a good question. That was probably above me. Thank you, Circle G. I mean, that. I think that it's that speaks to the difference between for instance, icons, the non-secular and the secular versions of the same word with icon. Icon is a word that's thrown around now. Like, for instance, when I'm doing this Jeff Buckley stream coming up, and I watched an interview with Jimmy Page, and he talks about how Jeff Buckley was iconic. Now, he says that, and he means it sincerely, that this was a guy who seemed to be a window into something more beautiful, but that's a secular terminology. But, non-secular holy icons and, stained glass and the church are a window into the infinity of heaven, right, through the church. And I think that is art. It's painting, it's art, but it is devotional. It's religious, specifically religious in nature, right, and in meaning and in purpose, versus, for instance, a beautiful painting that we see from in the art world, not in the modern art world, but but in the art world, when you see a beautiful painting or a classical painting, those are religious in nature, and they bring our minds to something ethereal and beautiful, and they lift us up. But they are not to be worshipped through. We see them in common places, if that makes sense. So that's what I have for that. Thank you, Circle G. Really appreciate that. Yeah, if you guys, I mean, I don't like reading. It's funny because I don't like reading the dark stuff and watching it too much. But we all do, and we need to go back to it. And I watch it and read it so you don't have to. Yes, exactly, KF. Yes. And I think that, but I think that, that you said the no church without art. Yes, because it's beautiful. But at the same time, the religious iconography and religious scripture transcends what we think of when we think of art, I guess is my term. Okay. So, but uh yes. But I think that it's important to go back to these things, and they are always relevant and revelatory. And also, that's what the landscape, that's what T.S. Eliot says is the landscape of literature. So I think it's important, when looking at something like the Screwtape Letters, to bring it into, to look at it in terms of sort of in an academic sense, cross curricular reading or what we know about life. So let's go to get a beer in Ballymena. By the way, Crispy, have you seen the new Liam Neeson movie in the land of saints and sinners? It's good. I liked it. It's got Liam Neeson and what's his face, his other buddy that went to Queens. They both went to Queens. I had a chance to meet Liam Neeson a few years ago because he was at a reunion for Queens University in New York, and I should have gone. I couldn't go because I was busy, but that would have been cool. And they're both patrons of the Lyric Theater in Belfast. And Ballymena, which I just mentioned in my poem in the last one, Twin Flames. So if you want to go and check out my my poems on that last one, dealing with HHHH Heydrich and Lena Heydrich, please go and check that out. That's one of probably my most favorite streams that I've done in recent times. Go check that out. Grab a membership and go check out that stream. No one else, by the way, has covered that book. I mean, there have been a few other analyses on YouTube, but not many, and they're hard to find. So nobody else has really covered Laurent Binet. So you got that from me specifically. And, I think it's important to cover obscure works, especially ones that I believe will be in the canon in the future, or firmly ensconced and absorbed into the canon. So that is I almost closed the whole thing right there. So that's about it, you guys. If you want to support me, you can do that. Again, look at the links: PayPal, Cash App, Venmo, Super Chats. I will, if I didn't get to them, or if you send me anything, I will get to them. Yes, it was filmed in Donegal. And Donegal is where I met Chuck Palahniuk when I went to that literary festival in 2006. Let's see. Bill Hicks says, "Hey, BLA, you've got a tiny bit of cotton wool on your beard there." Yeah. Yeah. That's my little wisdom patch. It's funny because the other people will say to me, "You got some ice cream in your beard. Man, you got some vanilla ice cream. I think you got a little something in your beard." That's my little wisdom patch right there. Look at that. I got white hair right here. Just right there. That's it. So I guess I'm pretty fortunate, being a 43, almost 44-year-old, not, to have my hair and to have to have a good color, I guess. Although my friends who are gone gray look pretty cool, but this is not in real. If you see this in real life, it's not gray. It's like shock white. It's a shock of white hair. So maybe you can make a wish on it. You can make a wish. Make your wish. See me in Sandy Row. Make a wish. Hey, thanks, Bill Hicks. Love your work, BLA. You definitely got patches of wisdom. Hey, thank you. I really appreciate that. So it's almost summertime. I got Ezra Pound coming up. I've got the analysis of Cormac McCarthy's The Counselor I got to do. I'm going to do The Trial, probably mostly focusing on Orson Welles' version of the film. I've got I've got to do the German dystopian film from the 70s that's on YouTube, The World on a Wire. I got to cover that. I got a bunch of stuff to cover. You can also catch me maybe tomorrow night. We'll see if I have got a lot of other stuff going on, but we'll see if I can get there on Boiler Room tomorrow night, Thursday night. And catch my appearances on TNT with Hesher. Shouts out to all of our friends. Make sure you support all of our friends. I wish I could get to Vegas July 22nd. I think Jamie and I are going to do Dino, Jeff Stein McEffrey's Jurassic Park analysis, and also the Gary Lockman book on Al Crowley and rock and roll when they get back. And also check out Heavy Things Lightly in the community tab. You can check out that. You can check out John Here's his channel. I was on there a couple months ago and he just put it up. That was really fun. Probably one of the best things that I've done. It was a lot of fun and he was great. And I hope to do something with him again. That's John Here's. over there on Heavy Things Lightly podcast. Check that out. Check it out on the community tab. Go to his channel and make sure you tell him in the comments that I sent you. And that's about it. Yep, study of stuff. Check out Jerry. Check out Maddie at Digital Minefield. He needs to come back and we'll do a stream sometime soon. Check out, of course, Rachel and Andy. Check out Base Homeschool Bomb, Crucible, JD, Jamie, all of our friends, Church of the Eternal Logos, all of our friends. So that's about all I got. All right, y'all. To play us out here, what does that mean? To end the show? All right, go. And that'll do us for tonight. And here's Sting and a cut off his lip. Can't do it. We'll do it live. I'll write it. We'll do it live. Fucking thing sucks. To play us out here is Sting and to cut off his new album with Rooks G. And here is Soul Crusher. Thanks, you guys. I love you. Peace. Oh, yeah, and I'm also doing Timon of Athens. I'll be back to Shakespeare. I'm doing Timon of Athens soon. SCREWTAPE Letters. 2 lives of Charlemagne. I'll be covering Charlemagne.